Okay, let's look at the histology of the nervous tissue. We're going to start off looking at a neuron. So this is trying to show a neuron here. A neuron is a nerve cell. These are long-lived cells. They live pretty much as long as we do. They are amitotic, so they don't divide. So what it means by the fact that they don't divide is if we damage nerve tissue, then it's unlikely that we're going to repair that, okay? So, and if you have my notes, I say it's amitotic mostly. There's a couple of places in which we have mitotic divisions. One is in your olfactory neurons, so your neurons are used to sense smell. Because they can be damaged by the environment, we replace those every so often. Another place in which we have mitotic divisions is our hippocampus. Now our hippocampus is an area where we store declarative memory. So declarative memory is facts and figures and stuff like that. So, you know, we have mitotic divisions there so we can store more information, all right? Also, neurons have a high metabolic rate. So we're going to talk about the reason why they have a high metabolic rate is all the energy that is used in a nerve impulse. Okay, so just to let you know, if you've heard that we only use 10% of our brains, that is not true. We use 100% of our brains throughout the day, okay? Neurons, our brain uses 20% of our daily energy, and it only comprises, 1 to 3% of your body's mass. So it uses a lot of energy in terms of its body mass. Okay, let's look at the parts of a neuron. So this is the cell body right there, so that part there. So this is a rounded area of the neuron. This contains the nucleus and other organelles. It is found either within our central nervous system or within ganglia. Now ganglia are a collection of nerve cell bodies outside of the central nervous system. So if we go back to this picture here, this is showing a ganglion. So that's where some neuron cell bodies will reside. Okay. So next is the axon. So this is the axon right here. So the axon is the appendage off of the cell body that sends an impulse. So there's usually, there's only one of these per neuron. All right, so you can see it can branch. All right, and it's usually myelinated. And what myelin is it's an insulating cover around an axon. So these things right here, you see Schwann cell, that is myelin. So it's an insulating cover around the axon. We're going to talk about the importance of myelin after we talk about what a nerve impulse is. But, if you've ever heard of white matter and gray matter, myelinated areas are white matter because the myelin is making that tissue look white. And here's where we send impulses. We have a lot of conduction. That's where we're sending impulses. In unmyelinated areas are what are known as gray matter. So gray matter is where we do integration. That's our thinking part of our brain and spinal cord. So doing integration there. You see a bunch of these other structures off of the cell body. Those are dendrites. Dendrite actually means branch. So these are appendages off of the cell body that receive impulses. So a neuron could have several dendrites down to no dendrites on them. These guys do not have myelin. Okay, let's look at the classification of neurons, and we can classify neurons two ways. One is structurally and the other is functionally. So this is looking at structurally. So right here is a multipolar neuron. And these are nerve cells that have many appendages. So here we have one axon, several dendrites there. Okay? These guys are the most common. About 99% of them are multipolar. Next is unipolar. That's what we see over here. We just have one extension off of that cell body. Okay? So only one appendage. So this is all axon though. All right? And these are mostly found in sensory neurons, which we'll talk about here shortly. Next is a bipolar neuron. So a bipolar neuron has two appendages off of it. One of those is a dendrite, the other is an axon. And these are found in some special sense organs. So in the retina of our eye, olfactory neurons that I talked about before are also bipolar. Next is functional. So getting these guys by their functional nature, so what they do. One are sensory neurons. So these are nerve cells that conduct impulses from a peripheral body part to the central nervous system. So these guys are unipolar, these sensory neurons, and those cell bodies are within ganglia. All right. Next is a motor neuron, and these are nerve cells that conduct impulses from the central nervous system to effectors. So these guys are mostly multipolar, so they look like this, and their cell bodies are within the central nervous system, so brain or spinal cord. Lastly are interneurons. An interneuron is a nerve cell that conducts impulses through central nervous system pathways where integration occurs. They are between a sensory neuron and a motor neuron. These guys are also multipolar, and most neurons are interneurons, about 99%. So if we go back, well, this picture shows here, well, we can go a little further back. Yeah, this one here. So here's a sensory neuron. Here are the cell bodies within a ganglia. Here's an interneuron. It's between the sensory neuron and a motor neuron. All right, so this is showing blue within the central nervous system. Green is in the peripheral nervous system. All right, let's move on to ganglia. So neuroglia. So moving on to neuroglia. Neuroglia are supporting cells that provide neurons with certain physiological requirements. They're sort of like the connective tissue of nervous tissue. So let's look at these cells in the central nervous system. And so the first cells are these guys here. These are called astrocytes. So astrocytes are cells that provide structural support. They transport nutrients and waste between neurons and capillaries, and they also form scar tissue. Now it doesn't show a neuron, but this is an astrocyte. If a neuron was here, you could see it transporting nutrients and waste between those two. Next are microglial cells. These are microglial cells here. These are small phagocytic cells. They're defensive cells within our brain and spinal cord. Next are epidermal cells. So these are showing epidermal cells there. Epidermal cells are cells that line cavities in our central nervous system. So we have 4 cavities within our brain, and we actually have a tube that runs down our spinal cord. And so epidermal cells line those. So epidermal cells make the cerebral spinal fluid by filtration, and other cells contain cilia to move that cerebral spinal fluid. Lastly are these guys here, oligodendrocytes. Oligodendrocytes are cells that provide a myelin sheath around axons in the in the central nervous system. Okay, so they put myelin around axons. All right, now let's take a look at the 2 types that we have in the peripheral nervous system. The first are satellite cells. So here's showing satellite cells. So satellite cells are cells that surround neuron cell bodies within ganglia. So they have similar functions to astrocytes in that regard. And next are Schwann cells. So this is a Schwann cell. These are cells that provide a myelin sheath around axons in the peripheral nervous system. So that's a Schwann cell. Now, if you look at the definition for a oligodendrocyte and the definition for a Schwann cell, it's almost identical. And that's because they have the same roles. They just are doing it in different parts of the body. Oligodendrocytes are doing it in the central nervous system. Schwann cells are doing it in the peripheral nervous system.